our channel. Today's video is all about probability. Now, I know you've probably heard of probability. You've probably heard of probability in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 5th grade. But just like we always do with the things you've heard of before, we're going to add some stuff to it. So, let's get started. You ready? Let's go.
So like I said earlier, we're going to start today with probability. And now I know you've learned about probability in 2nd grade and in 3rd grade and in 4th grade. And here we are doing it again in 5th grade, but I promise we're going to add some extra steps to it. Now, I'm sure you've seen that as a pattern with the rest of the stuff we've learned in the past. We keep learning the same topics as previous years, but in 5th grade we just add some extra information or extra steps to it. So let's get started. Okay, so like all my other videos that I've started out, you cannot do probability unless you know some specific terms. And I'm sure you already know some of these, but we have to talk about them before we can move on. So the first one is just pretty obvious, probability. Now, probability is the likelihood that something will happen. That word likelihood, that means like how possible it is. The likelihood that something will happen, the number that expresses that likelihood. The probability of being hit by lightning twice is extremely low. So when we're talking about probability, we're basically talking about taking chances and seeing how possible something is and how likely it is to happen. Now in 5th grade, the extra steps that we're going to add are representing probability with fractions, with numbers. The next word that you have to know is sample space. And in order to be able to represent probability with fractions, you have to know what a sample space is. And a sample space is the set of all of the possible outcomes in an experiment. So let's use flipping a quarter, for example. And we have 2 quarters, and we're going to flip them both in the air. All of those possible outcomes of me flipping those 2 quarters is my sample space. So one of my quarters could land on heads and the other one could land on heads. One of my quarters could land on heads and the other one on tails. One of them on tails and the other one on heads. Or both of them could be on tails. So my sample space is heads, 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 tails, tails, heads, or tails, tails. So my sample space in number form would be 4. The sample space, again, all of the possible outcomes. So let's say we were talking about rolling a dice. Well, there are 6 sides on a dice, so my sample space would be 6 because there are 6 possible numbers that I could get when I roll it. So let's be sure we know these basic terms before we move on with anything else. So earlier, probability, okay? The measurement of chance that an event will happen, the likelihood that it will happen, how possible it actually is. The next word is outcome. Now I'm sure you already know what that is, but again, it is just a possible result of an experiment. If I have a penny and I flip it, one of the outcomes could be heads, the other outcome could be tails. So my sample space could be 2 for flipping that penny because there are 2 possible outcomes. So like I said earlier, sample space is all the possible outcomes of an experiment. Every single thing that could happen, but we're not sure if it's going to yet. And finally, you should know this one definitely from science. An experiment is an activity that involves a chance. So me using that example of flipping a penny, my experiment was me flipping that penny. The experiment will give me my outcome and it will give me my sample space. And from those things, I can find my probability. They're all related. Okay, next we're going to find some examples of probability. Now I know I've already said this a few times, but I want you to see it written out in front of you. So an example of an experiment like I said earlier, would be flipping a coin. My experiment is flipping a coin. Just like we did in science, we did different experiments to find out different outcomes. Well, an outcome from that experiment could be that the coin landed on heads. Now, we also know that an outcome could be that it lands on tails, but we're just going to use heads for this example. So my sample space, again, all the possible outcomes. Could be heads, could be tails. So that sample space is 2. Okay, so I'm sure you've seen this before, because I know whenever you learn this, especially in 3rd grade, you talk about the line of likelihood and how likely things can be and how unlikely things can be. So this right here is called the line of likelihood, and it has a bunch of different possibilities as to how likely or how unlikely a certain event could be. So we're going to take these words and we're going to place them in the correct location on the line of likelihood. So at the very end over here, 0% likelihood, that is when something is impossible. Like looking outside and the sky has turned lime green. That is absolutely impossible. It is not going to happen. Next up, when something is a little bit more likely than impossible, it is unlikely. So the fact that it would snow tomorrow. Well, I mean, it's still possible to snow tomorrow, but considering the fact that we're in the month of May, it's probably not going to happen. It's pretty unlikely. Next, we have equally likely, and that is when something could happen or it couldn't happen. 50-50 chance. Like when I'm flipping a quarter, it could land on heads or it could land on tails. Both of those things are equally likely. Next, we have likely, and that is when something is probably going to happen, like the fact that I'm probably going to have to mow my yard in the next week because it's rained so much. It's pretty likely because we know that rain makes grass grow. And then finally, the most likely thing that you could possibly have is when something is certain. Like, I'm going to walk outside and see that the grass is green. That is absolutely 100% going to happen. So it is certain. Okay, we're going to take these events and put them in the right category as to whether they're impossible, unlikely, likely, or certain. And I have some events written down here. We have a student will ride the bus home. If I jump, I will come back down. It will snow tonight. The winter will be colder than the summer. A black cat will walk past you today. And finally, a horse will fly. So let's put those in the right place. First up, in the impossible category, I hope you already know what's going to go there. Definitely the fact that a horse will fly. I'm sorry, that would be awesome, but it is just not going to happen. It is impossible. Okay, next up we have unlikely. I mean, it's possible that a black cat could walk past you today, but if you don't have a black cat in your house, how is that going to happen? It's unlikely. Also, we have the fact that it'll snow tonight. I mean, it's possible that it could snow tonight, but again, considering that we are in the month of May, it's probably not going to happen. But it is not completely impossible, so we put it here in the unlikely category. Next up, we have the fact that a student will ride the bus home. Now, I know that's not likely in our current situation here, but let's pretend that we are in school and everything's perfect and normal. It's pretty likely that a student will ride the bus home. And finally, the certain category, if I jump, I will definitely come back down. And hopefully you can realize that that is due to gravity. Gravity is always there. It is absolutely certain. And lastly, the fact that the winter will be colder than the summer. It's certain, okay? I mean, the fact that it's December, right around Christmas, December, January, February, all of those months are definitely going to be colder than July and August. If not, something is majorly wrong, and that is just not going to happen. So that is certain. All right, like I said earlier, the extra step in our 5th grade situation is the fact that we're going to start representing probability with fractions. Now, in order to represent probability with a fraction, you have to know the word outcomes. And again, you probably already do. An outcome is the event that happens due to the experiment. So, you have to know how to represent the experiment and what the outcomes were in a fraction. So, here's an example I've given you. our numerator, which again, remember, that's the top number, our numerator will be the number of waves that something happened. And our denominator, remember, that's the bottom, will be the number of all possible outcomes, otherwise known as the sample space. So let's look at this 3/4 fraction here. Let's say that there were 4 t-shirts, and there was a red one, a blue one, a green one, and a yellow one, and I picked the yellow one and the blue one and the green one all to buy. Okay, well, I bought 3 of those shirts, so that's the ones I chose, but there were 4 total. My sample space was 4. So 3 out of, remember that fraction line right there, we read that as out of. So 3 out of 4. 3 shirts out of 4 shirts.
So find the probability of pulling a green marble from a bag with 2 yellow, 3 green, 2 blue, and 3 red. So we have to see, well, if I'm going to reach into this bag, what would be the chance or probability of pulling a green? So there are 1, 2, 3 green out of a possible 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 3 tenths. So 3 tenths could be written like that. It could be written as 0.3, or it could be written as 30%. So that's the chance, the probability of pulling a green marble. Now,
so when we look at this, all she did was take the entire sample space, which was all of the marbles put together. 1, 2, 3 reds, 4, 5 with blue, 6, 7, 8 with green, 9, 10 with yellow, and put all of that together as our denominator, which was 10. And then took the probability, the top number, the numerator of the thing that we were trying to find, and we were trying to find green. So there were 1, 2, 3 green, so she put that as her numerator. 3 out of 10 chance of picking a green marble out of the bag. All right, next we're going to do some practice problems here, and we're going to work on putting these questions into probability represented by a fraction. So let's look at this first one. If you roll a die, what is the probability that you will roll a 6? Well, this is just a regular 6-sided die, and we know that they have 6 options, so there's only one side that says 6 on it, so it would be a 1 out of 6 chance that you will roll a number 6 on that die. The next one says a bag has 3 pink buttons, 2 blue and 1 green. What is the probability that you will pick a blue button? Well, there were 3 pink plus 2 more blue plus 1 green. That's 6 total buttons, and we want to know what the probability is that we would pick a blue button. Well, there were 2 blue, and we know that we put our sample space as our denominator, so that means 6 would go on the bottom, and what we're trying to find on the top. So there's 2 on the top as our numerator. So that would be 2 out of 6. Well, here's another thing that we have to remember. We can simplify that 2/6 fraction because both the top and the bottom is even. That means it can be simplified by 2, and that would take it down to a 1/3 chance, a 1 out of 3 chance that we would reach in and pick a blue button. The next one is, what is the probability that when flipping a coin you will get heads? Okay, well, let's pick a coin. How about a quarter? If we were going to flip a quarter, there were 2 possible outcomes, 2 sides, heads and tails. And if I flipped it in the air, there's a 1 chance that it would be heads, a 50-50 chance. Or what we also know as 1 out of 2, because again, sample space is 2, there's a heads and a tails, so that's 2, and then heads is 1 out of 2. Next, we have, what is the probability of landing on an even number if you roll a die? Well, we know that a regular die has 6 sides, and each of those sides represents numbers 1 through 6. So if we were to list out the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2 is an even number, 4 is an even number, and 6 is an even number. So that means there are 3 possible chances that I could land on an even number. And there are 6 total chances as our sample space, so that means 6 would go as our denominator. So our fraction would be 3 out of 6. 3 chances out of 6 chances. And again, we have to remember to simplify, and that can be simplified by 3. So it could be a 1 out of 2 chance that I will land on an even number if I roll a die. The next one here is you have a box of 10 black socks and 3 white. What is the probability that you will randomly pick a white sock? Okay, well, first we have to find our sample space to give us our denominator. So again, sample space is the entire possible outcome. So 10 black plus 3 white, well, that gives us 13 as our sample space. So that means our denominator is going to be 13, and we're looking for the white socks. So there are 3 white socks. That means our fraction would be 3 out of that 13 sample space. 3 out of 13. And lastly, we have a spinner has numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on it. If you spin it, what is the chance that it will land on an odd number? Well, this is kind of like this one back up here. There are 6 total chances, and 3 of them are odd. This number 1 right here, this 3 right here, this 5 right here. So there are 1, 2, 3 out of that whole possible 6 that are odd. And again, we have to remember to simplify it. Okay, so we're going to answer some questions about this spinner right here that I've made. We notice that half of it is yellow, a fourth of it is pink, and then we have some other colors down here. So let's see, is it likely to spin and land on what color? So likely, we're talking about, remember that scale of likeliness, it was almost right up there next to certain. So it is likely that when you spin this, you'll probably land on a yellow, only because that whole half of that circle is yellow. It is unlikely to spin and land on what color? Well, if it's likely to land on yellow, it can't be yellow. What do you think? Unlikely is all the way down on the end next to impossible, so it's probably going to be blue because that blue is such a small amount on that circle. Okay, next we have it is impossible to spin and land on what color? Remember, impossible means that it is never, ever, 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 ever going to happen. So I just picked an orange because there's no orange here. You could say neon green, you could say black, you could say white. I mean, as long as you pick a color that doesn't exist, because as long as it doesn't exist, it will be impossible to spin and land on. And then lastly, we have what will certainly happen if you spin. Remember, certain means that it's going to happen every single time. So if I spin, I will definitely land on either yellow, pink, green, or blue because that's what my spinner's made of. It's absolutely certain that one of those colors is going to happen. Okay, let's answer some questions about some pizza. I know that sounds good to me right now. Let's go. Answer the questions about the pizza below. How likely is it to get a slice of pizza with pepperoni on it? Okay, well, first things first, we have to find our sample space. Remember, that's all the possibilities. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 total slices, so that means our denominator is going to be 8. And then we have pepperoni. We're looking for pepperoni. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 slices of pepperoni. So that's 4 out of 8. And to me, 4 out of 8, that's very likely because there's most of this pizza is covered in pepperoni. So it's very likely that you're going to get a piece that has pepperoni on it. Okay, what is the probability of getting a slice of pizza with mushrooms? Okay, there are 2 slices here with mushrooms on it out of the 8. Okay, 2 out of our sample space of 8. Remember, we have to simplify, takes it down to 1 out of 4, only because I divided both the top and the bottom by 2 to simplify that. Okay, which topping are you most likely to get on your pizza slice? Well, that means we're going to have to find the topping that exists the most out of those 8 sample spaces. Well, we already talked about this. It's pepperoni because there are 1, 2, 3, 4 slices of pepperoni and there are only 2 slices of everything else. So pepperoni is the most likely. And then finally, how likely is it to get a slice of pizza with olives? I don't know about you, but I see no olives on that pizza, so it is 100% impossible because, again, there are no olives. Alright, so I have posted an assignment on Clever and on Teams about this. Please be sure you do your assignment. You can come back to the video if you need some extra help, and I will see you next time.